This week, we put Tu B'Shvat, the New Year of the Trees, in conversation with ChatGPT and other AI or artificial intelligence tools that have been making the rounds in social media and headlines lately.
You're listening to the Joyous Justice Podcast,
a weekly show hosted by April Baskin with Tracy Guy Decker.
In a complex world in which systemic oppression conditions us to deny others and our own humanity, let's dedicate ourselves to the pursuit and embodiment of wholeness, love, and thriving in the world and in our own lives. It's time to heal and flourish our way to a more joyously just future. Belated happy Tu B'Shvat, Tracy and friends.
Yeah, thanks. You too.
Yeah, when this posts, although people might listen to it, this episode at any time, in which case just happy day to you, whatever day it is, or happy evening, whenever you're tuning in. But in terms of our recording and when this will initially be published, it's going to be published a few days after the holiday, the Jewish holiday of Tu B'Shvat, the holiday that honors trees and sort of nature more broadly, but specifically through honoring of trees and all the many things they symbolize, which are many around the world and even within Judaism. It's a holiday that celebrates that. And traditionally, one of the ways of observing Tu B'Shvat is to have a Tu B'Shvat Seder, a ceremonial, ritualized meal that involves different fruits and various rituals as a part of it, of ways of honoring the different ways that trees enhance our lives. So I just wanted to identify that. And I think there's like an interesting juxtaposition with the theme of Tu B'Shvat and what we're looking to talk about today, which is AI, specifically some of the hubbub around ChatGPT. And I'd love to add some initial Joyous Justice insights and thoughts into the mix, as well as some of the other reflections that I've heard, and kind of just have us share some thoughts about that swirling dynamic. And to me, there's an interesting juxtaposition there inherently between like the deeply unequivocally natural world and the very much not natural digital space of AI, and also around speed and pacing and timing. So before I start to dive into that, are there any additional things that you might want to say, Tracy, about our proximity to the holiday of Tu B'Shvat?
Oh, thank you. No, I don't think so. I think you covered it. I actually was really, I was leaning into, I wanted to define two terms, which maybe you were going to get to, but one is AI, which stands for artificial intelligence.
Oh, thank you.
And the other is this ChatGPT, which before we hit record, we realized like, I didn't know that's what it was called, but this is the specific form of artificial intelligence into which you can feed existing written documents and ask it to spit out a new written document.
Well, and it's even more than that. It's that, so that, thank you. And that segues us into this part of the conversation. It's that you can both give it things. It also just pulls all of the available like open source information that's available on the planet online. Mm-hmm. So you could ask it to write an essay about feminist politics in 1695 in the south of France, and it will likely generate an essay for you. And my first introduction to hearing about, and I think I actually had heard about ChatGPT before because I'd signed into it before. So I guess I'd heard about some earlier iteration of it and tried it and had the experience that I've usually had the experience that I've had every time I try artificial intelligence, which is that it turns out pretty mainstream stuff, which at times can be somewhat helpful. But for me, it's like, oh, this is what's already, this is actually doesn't help me at all. And I know that when Sarah tried to enter some of our content in to pull some quotes, it wasn't able to do it. So it, so that's one of the first things, I mean, one of multiple things to note about ChatGPT, that it's limited in the way that many of the sources that it's compiling are limited, right?
Mm-hmm.
And also the way its creators, it also may reflect some of the challenges of its creators in the way, in a different sort of way, that certain cell phones are horrible at photographing or getting footage of dark-skinned people,
Right.
right?
Right.
That it doesn't include the full tone. And this is a little bit different, but similarly, that artificial intelligence can only use what is out in the ether.
Right.
So
Right.
so in terms of the latest conversation that's been happening, one of my first introductions to it was from a post, was via a Facebook post from a rabbi who's the spouse of a friend of mine, and he was very, I would cite him, I would quote him, but I don't know if he's comfortable being quoted. I don't remember what the privacy settings were on his post, but he was extremely alarmed about this. He was alarmed about this as it related to his children, and how easy it would be to cheat on essay assignments. And he also tested it around some Jewish content, and his colleagues had too, and they were blown away by by the sophisticated nature of what ChatGPT delivered. And I think, again, I'm liking using the word juxtaposing today, comparing this, or connecting to this to what I was just saying a moment ago. To me, with my knowledge base, I wonder if your mind is going there too. Like, what that immediately brings up for me is that, since Jews are not the only, but we consider ourselves the people of the book and the written word. And Jews have been sharing online for a while now. And our religion is so heavily text and discussion and debate based. And we've been targeted for destruction over the millennia. But in the time that the internet has been around, that has been a time of fairly good resourcing for our community, and tons of our responses and content is available online, as opposed to, say, around like social justice or diversity, equity, and inclusion, where you have different leaders and activists who have varying levels, actually, but at times there's a disproportionate dynamic of disenfranchisement, of lack of resourcing, either by the people who are mostly impacted, the folks who are leading the work who are most directly impacted, and even the folks who are resourced. They're countering all of the lack of resourcing, and there's a backlog of things to do. And just generally, it would make, or with DEI professionals, that a number of us, that's diversity, equity, inclusion, or social change leaders, that there's not the equivalent in comparing these two from our Jewish vantage point of rabbinic social justice leaders who spend much of their career in a scholarly spiritual pursuit of documenting all that is happening. And so to me, there's just lots of layers of this that are interesting, where this rabbi was a bit concerned, for multiple reasons. He was concerned about the ethics. One thing that he raised that really resonated with me, in general, the post scared me a little bit. It was very compelling what he said. And I was also like, but this doesn't seem like the slant that I would ultimately take on this frame. But one thing that did bother me, that I can't remember if he said directly, but it sort of came up, is the dynamic around plagiarism. That for me, actually, if this software is compiling lots of things, that's great. But where are the citations?
Right. Mm-hmm.
There's a separate piece in terms of ethics about students, that is equally important, although I'm a little less interested in that right now, because there's some other facets of it that I want to talk about, and that doesn't directly impact me, in my mind, in our work that we do in the world, although that affects a lot of institutions. But also from a learning, just so for ethics around it, as a company and as a community, and for me personally as a leader, and I think you're deeply aligned with this, Tracy, I always love to cite my sources whenever I can. And so that just seems like icky and unethical, that's not okay. So so that's concerning. And I could also see like it might be a little bit of a conundrum in a way of, but even still, based upon it's the technology, it should be able to do it, because maybe it's drawing from multiple sources. So maybe it has like 1,000 sources of the same thing, because it's technology, it's a machine, that it might be like this mass, but even still, it could, could say there's also there, this is one sort, there are 20 other or 5,000 other sources that also speak to the French Revolution, or whatever it's talking, any number of random Jewish inquiry, which hand should you use to take care of your personal hygiene after morning prayer? Like, I had a friend whose husband eventually found something like, which hand should I know to take care of business? Should I wipe myself with? Right? Like, there's probably some Jewish text around this if I search. And he found it. And it was something about how, you should, anyway, I don't remember the details, but there was a Jewish response to this question. So anyway, so I think I want to, so that sets the stage a little bit. And so as with a number of different things, you have this collective Socratic of sorts, more or less Socratic seminar happening around this conversation, where you have certain teachers and clergy and people and copywriters who, for various reasons, both ethically and practically in the context of their work, experience various levels of alarm and concern about this, whether it's related to the ethics down to self-interest, about the impact of this. And then you have folks like Gary Vee and other people who are out there who are like super pro technology, and this is better. And, since this is going to be a thing, like, why have our kids waste their time having to search for all these things when they can just find it on the internet? Not necessarily with like writing the essays, but getting certain answers to, which, like, so there's like all kinds of different debates swirling around that. In some ways, that's our old debates about technology and AI and artificial intelligence in general. And recently, in the more recent weeks, I've heard a couple, like, it started to die down. Like, initially, when it first came out, everyone was excited, but then as various folks like Black intellectuals were coming online and saying, this isn't so helpful for me in terms of helping me with my copy in any way. And which was kind of my experience of it a few years ago, when I tried to tried to use it to duplicate some of the things I'd already written. And what it came back with was just like so not on brand, so lacked depth and sophistication. And then I've even heard like a number of white copywriters and marketing professionals say that for certain creators, it can help you a little bit, but since this is now available, everyone's going to be using it. And so it has limited value, or lots of people are going to be using it. So it has limited value. And at the end of the day, original content is actually now especially going to be even more important to focus on. And now here's the tricky part. I watched this video a few weeks ago that kind of alarmed me. Like, he was saying it in sort of a good way, but it kind of went to that place of like, help me out here, Chase, like, what are the high school books, like Brave New World and like, other sorts of dystopian realities. Like, I think this dude who's like a super capitalist business guy, I consume lots of different materials, and I can't remember what he was just talking about. He was sharing some information about what's like some of these tech races and what's happening right now around and the plans for how AI might be used. And it alarmed. I don't think his point was not to alarm people, but it alarmed me in terms of what he was saying. And I remembered what this colleague of mine, this rabbi, had said, and like I was beginning to feel in a different sort of way, similar to the way he felt. Like, oh, this just doesn't, like, in my kishkas, this is not, yikes. Like, you're saying like this is good, and to me this is alarming and not very justice oriented. And part of me, I don't remember the details, but it just had this like, it's going to be everywhere and it's going to impact our lives. And I just remember thinking, as I was thinking through it, and it was causing this like slight mini existential crisis for me about like, what is going to happen and how does this impair or impact social justice issues and our capacity to make change around these things. And the place where I landed with it was, and I wonder if I could find it. Maybe that would be helpful. And it's weird though, because it's not like, this is not a creator that, like, I'm willing to listen to anything. It's not like creator that I'm looking to like endorse in any way. You know, it was just like a dude talking. Like I was trying to get, you know, more info about different components of this and how it's being used and stuff.
I've spent a lot more time thinking about the AI art, the image generators, than the text generators. They sort of made the rounds.
That's another dynamic. Yeah, that's another dynamic that's been coming up. Yeah.
And that really, watching that sort of make the rounds among my circles was really interesting. And some of the things that you said about the limits of the AI based on the limits of those who programmed it. Like I had several friends who were like, AI seems to want me to lose weight because the images, the self-portraits that the AI was generating of them were smaller than they are in you know, IRL, in real life. And also I had a couple of friends who are either Black or multiracial, or, you know, who are Black or brown, or identify as such. And AI was making, like, had one friend who was like, AI thinks I'm a white woman. Like, I don't, like, she felt really put out because the AI did not, it lightened her skin and did not see her African heritage features. So those are sort of interesting, like, bolsters to all that you're saying about, you know, some of the limitations and some of the concerns about plagiarism also show up in the image spaces where, you know, it's been fed art from contemporary working artists, potentially as source material, and just kind of rips them off. On the other hand, the one thing that I keep coming back to is that, like,
which is very concerning,
so early in the development of this tool that it's really hard to actually predict. I mean, there are indications that Socrates was sort of felt the same way about written language because it would destroy memory, which we only know because his students wrote it down. Right. So I don't know. It's, I see both huge potential. I see huge potential for both harm and improvement. And it's hard to say which way it will end up going, in part because humans are so capable of both harm and help. So that's where I am, like, sort of straddling at the moment.
Yeah, that's where I was. And one of my takeaways after watching this video, which I'm trying, but realistically, I know once I found it, I would be like, do I really want to advertise that I watched this? But like, it wasn't, it was, you know, it was for my you know, it was mediocre, but it was giving me background information. So anyway, so I'm going to stop searching for it. Yeah. And that's initially roughly where I landed initially. And then after watching this video where it shared some additional things that caused me to feel a bit alarmed about where it might be going, one of the things that provided great comfort, especially now being both very much still in process and on the other side of the initial phase of my the work I've been doing around my Kohenet process, around my Kohenet ordination and my Indigenous coming home work and integration of different spiritualities and ways of knowing. One of my key takeaways of, like, okay, this thing could end up being super powerful in various ways is that it doesn't operate within the realm of spirit nor energy. The timing of your dog's barking right now feels very aligned. Like, I don't necessarily have a perspective about what it means, but you know what? I think it's like the natural world. Like, I think what's coming up is like the natural world being like, F yes, like, speak it. Also, maybe there's like the mailman outside your house, the mail person, but mail delivery person. But that timing was just like cool to me. Like, all of us sentient beings shall rise, and that because in some ways it was, I don't exactly, but it was that like people would be outpaced. And I was concerned about this as it related to your point, that both in general, like I generally land on positive frames and thinking that like that core theory that it doesn't take an equal amount of light, like that light so quickly dispels darkness and all these different things, right? So that is all still intact. But around this specific piece, it was getting threatened a little bit. But then I remembered, even if certain things are being controlled, like basically like it can't control God and spirit. Like, and that is something that I've been cultivating safety with. And for the first time, more so than before, like in the work I've been doing around this, it's been around reaching a point of feeling safe and fully valid, and like I can be included for the fullness of my being and all the ways that I show up. But this realization was like, oh, this is actually like, it helped me see so clearly that in this hypothetical struggle of around for social justice and how AI may or may not play into that, that as it says on Joe Kent Katz's website, they can't take our magic. And that was like one of the Joyous Justice pieces specifically, or the Joyous Justice piece that I was particularly excited to toss into the mix.
Yeah. I think that really resonates. That really resonates. I do think there's things that we can learn from AI. Like even the images ones, this is like such a small thing and I'm not exactly sure how it resonates, but it's coming up for me. So I'll share it. The Lensa AI, which is the one that was sort of making the rounds on social media a few weeks ago. I played with it and, uploaded a bunch of selfies, and then it spit out, me as a fairy princess and me as a sci-fi hero or whatever. And, and I had a lot of fun with it. And one of the things that was like an interesting takeaway for me, so I was born with cross eye, lazy eye, right? And I've had multiple surgeries and whatever. And it is a thing that I am very self-conscious about in my looks. I'm very self-conscious about my eye crossing. And the AI, whatever, the engine saw that cross eye and included it in many of the like paintings, the so-called paintings, the digital paintings that it created of me. And it was really interesting for me to see that and still be like, wow, this is gorgeous. Like, I love the way I look in this AI rendering of me, even with the cross eye. And it wasn't even like a despite, it was like a part of the whole picture. And that was sort of an interesting mirror for me, that I don't see in photographs of myself. Like if there's a photograph and my eye is crossing in the photo, I'm like, oh, can't use that one. Like I immediately dismiss it. And something about the nature of the AI rendering, still included
or the
this
art
piece,
right? Yeah. That the AI
created.
used.
Yeah. And I'm not exactly sure what I'm taking away from that, but it was just like it's a moment of like, that was an interesting reflection back at myself, that was a little different than the folks who were like, why is AI making me, airbrushing me thinner than I am? Exactly. Or lighter than I am.
Didn't
or whatever.
Accept, right. Different facets of their physical.
So that's sort of an interesting, which again may speak to the programmers, right? Like the programmers who did it may, if one of them had the same congenital condition that I have, they may have programmed it to like align pupils for the rendered thing, but that for whatever reason that bias wasn't baked into the programming. I don't know. I'm not sure where I'm going with this, so I apologize for that.
Yeah, but no, nothing to apologize for. And I think, so I just think it's helpful for us to track these different things and the choices we're making and how it lands with us in different ways, like for us on our, in terms of my content production, I've encouraged my colleague, my assistant, Sarah, to use it to see if it could help us save time in summarizing our content, or doing different, or helping us refangle different things. And it wasn't very helpful, which I've heard from other social justice and BIPOC creators that they had a similar experience. And I personally opted not to use the Lensa. It was interesting for me because I intuitively felt wary of it. And then as I read the articles, I was like, oh yeah, that tracks. Like, I don't want it having my data, which is like somewhat arbitrary in the context of all the things that have my data. But there was something about it where I was like, I don't want it to have my data. And I was really curious. And then as I read, as you did, the discussions about it taking people's artwork, I didn't like that. And so I abstained from it in solidarity with artists and spent time thinking about, like, for me, and also I think for others, like noticing the desire to see what I would look like and just thinking about the ways and at times that we don't value art, you know, and how much people really enjoyed that when this machine was stealing people's artwork or taking, like, I don't even, and it, like, is it stealing? Like, I think there's like a really interesting conversation to have there, but and harming folks who are systemically oppressed in our society, who are under resourced, which generally many artists are and aren't respected in the context of it contradicting, or not usually, sometimes, but in general, it contradicting different forms of systemic oppression, either by being in conversation with it, or not, you know, being less focused on the production and profit and different things like that, and seeing how much joy it brought people, and having a desire for that, but like wondering, like, what was AI doing with my face? Was this Lensa thing going to do with my likeness? And also then when I read about that, feeling hurt on behalf of different creators whose stuff it was taking. And so I think something that I think we're modeling here that I think is helpful in this conversation is, and in any conversation where there are multiple threads of, like, how do we stay in it, and how do we track these different things and be in an ongoing dialogue about, like, what we're seeing and the choices we're making and where we're landing with it, and to staying open to listening to each other and accounting for these different variables. And I think a theme that came up in some of what you said that I really align with about it is, how can we track it, be mindful, and stay, that's sort of what, I guess that's what I'm further clarifying what I'm saying, stay in a place of awareness that's not anchored in fear. How do we stay anchored in our agency around it, even as certain things are moving quickly? And how do we maintain connection and relationship with those who matter most around it, even as we may have different analyses, and just keep it, like, how do we continue to evolve and stay in that place, which I think is a common theme throughout all of our work.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's well said. Mm-hmm.
So I think there's probably some, like, fun quip here that I'm not sure what it is. So I just think this I guess I'll just try it. I have no idea where this is going. But so with all of that being said, I think tree medicine is helpful here, and that great progress is made over time. Yeah, you're laughing in the background. Yeah, exactly. I was like, I'm wanting to, now you get why I was laughing. I was like, you know, that, like, as I'm talking about this, as I think about trees and their deep roots and the length of time it takes them to grow, I'm seeing some through lines here. At one point, like 5 or 10 minutes ago, you, in the conversation, or 12 or something like that, you mentioned something about pacing and not being in a rush, or that it's not moving, that certain people are that it's not necessarily moving as quickly. I mean, this video I watched had me thinking differently, but that still in this world, trees beautifully model the teaching of Ricardo Levins Morales and Aurora Levins Morales, that the key essential work that we need to do is best done in a way that is slow, deep, and irreversible. And as quickly as AI may be moving or not, that we can, that's the through line. And also what I was just saying, that we can anchor into relationship that is slow, deep, and irreversible, and continue to invest in ourselves and our connection with spirit and the divine and the various ways we can know, so that we can fully claim our power and move toward justice, keeping in mind the wisdom and strength of tree medicine, as we are not always in alignment with that, but it's a good reference point to anchor back into. Did you want to say something else?
Well, connected with that, with Tu B'Shvat, like the reason we have Tu B'Shvat is to know like at what point we need to start tithing and when we may harvest the fruit of a tree.
Yes.
So like the fruit that comes before it's actually appropriate to harvest. Like I'm sort of thinking of that, like that lesson too, that you can't, if you sort of rush the harvest, then you can damage the tree. And you also, it's hard to judge whether or not the fruit ultimately will be sweet if you pick it when it is underripe. And I'm wondering if that's possibly a metaphor for where AI is and where it might be going.
Yeah. So the trees remind us to pace ourselves. That ideally, I don't know if the tech world will pace itself, but our relationship to that and how we are interacting with it and how that may stay consistent or may evolve and shift dramatically over time, that we think about pacing and our rootedness and different seasons of our lives. So with that, wishing you a happy, Tu B'Shvat is not a week, it's a day, but happy week in which Tu B'Shvat occurs, and sending you much love. Until next time. Thanks for tuning in.
To learn more about Joyous Justice LLC, our team, and how you can get involved with our community, check out the info in our show notes or find us at joyousjustice.com.
If you enjoyed this episode, show us some love.
Subscribe wherever you're listening.
Tell your people. Share what you're learning and how your leadership is evolving.
Stay humble,
But not too humble,
and keep going.
because the future is ours to co-create.